Coach cut black girl from team for being too slow. She ran the 100 meters in 9:8 at nationals. Pack your bag, Amara. You're done. You're too slow, and frankly, you always have been. He said it loud. Loud enough for every girl on that track to stop mid-stride and look up. Loud enough for the parents along the chain-link fence to go very, very still. Loud enough for the assistant timekeepers at the far end of the straightaway to lower their clipboards. Amara Osi stood at the starting blocks in her worn practice spikes. The left one had a small crack along the toe box she'd reinforced with athletic tape, and she had a gold pin fastened to the inside of her collar, barely the size of a thumbnail, barely visible unless you were looking for it. And she looked at Coach Dale Briggs with the calmest eyes you have ever seen on a 16-year-old girl. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. She said quietly, "Yes, sir," and she picked up her bag. Not one person on that track said a word, not a teammate, not a parent, not the assistant coach who had been standing close enough to hear everything, and whose name, eventually, would appear in a formal grievance filing. Not one person spoke. Because Dale Briggs had 11 years of authority behind him and a pearl-white truck parked in the faculty lot and a name on a plaque in the gymnasium hallway. And the particular silence that falls when power is being abused in public is one of the most durable silences in human experience. He had no idea who he had just sent home. In 48 hours, the entire country would know her name, and Dale Briggs would spend the rest of that week wishing he had never learned it. Have you ever been told you weren't good enough by someone who had already made up his mind? Before the clock ran, before the gun fired, before you ever took a single step, that you never would be? Let me take you back. 48 hours before everything changed. The town of Millhaven, Georgia sits about 60 miles south of Atlanta in the kind of red clay lowland where the gas station closes at 9, and the Friday night football game is the closest thing to a civic theater most people will ever attend. It is not a glamorous town. It is not a wealthy town. But it is a town that takes its high school athletics with a seriousness bordering on the religious, the kind of place where the gymnasium banners curl at the edges from years of being important, and where the track program at Crestwood High School is spoken of at boosters' dinners, with the reverence normally reserved for something sacred. Coach Dale Briggs had been the man underneath those banners for 11 years. He was 53, thick through the shoulders, with the particular confidence of a man who has spent a long time being the final word on something. He drove a pearl-white pickup. He wore the same khaki coaching shorts from March through October. He had a daughter who had run for Crestwood 8 years ago, second fastest on the team. If you believed the stories he repeated at those booster dinners, which the people who had actually kept records did not fully corroborate. He had a way of looking at a young woman that communicated before he ever opened his mouth what category he had already assigned her. He also had, in Marcus Fenwick, a very powerful friend. Marcus Fenwick sat on the school board. Marcus Fenwick's company sponsored the booster dinner every fall, wrote checks that covered new equipment and travel expenses to invitationals, and had a daughter, Skylar, who ran the 100 meters in 10.8 seconds on a good day when the wind was kind, and who had a college visit to Georgia Tech penciled into a calendar on a refrigerator in a house that was considerably larger than any house in the county where Amara Osi grew up. There were filed complaints, 2 of them, it would later emerge, from the parents of 2 athletes who had left the program in the previous 3 years, who had described, in language that was careful and specific, a pattern of evaluation that did not seem to reflect what the stopwatch was actually saying when it came to certain girls on the team. Both complaints had been reviewed by the district's athletic director. Both had been closed with a letter that used the phrase, insufficient evidence of misconduct. Both families had moved on, because moving on is what you do when the institution closes the door. Dale Briggs had not changed a single thing about the way he ran his program. Into this world in the spring of Amara Osi's freshman year came Amara herself. Her family had moved to Millhaven from a neighborhood in Atlanta when Amara was 12, and they had arrived with very little except a deep, practiced sense of order, the kind that comes from navigating harder circumstances than anyone in Millhaven would have guessed from looking at the apartment on Culver Street with its cracked parking lot, and the blue tarp on one corner of the flat roof that the landlord had promised for going on 2 years to replace. Her mother, Grace Osei, worked the early shift at the distribution center 3 towns over. She left the house at 5:15 every morning with a thermos of tea and a brown paper bag that contained the same lunch she had packed every working day of her adult life: half a turkey sandwich, a small bag of crackers, and an apple she would not touch until exactly 2 in the afternoon, when the afternoon slowdown hit, and she needed something to carry her to the end of the shift. The routine of it was not poverty. It was precision. Grace Osei did not waste things. She did not waste food or time or effort, and she did not waste her attention on things that did not matter, which meant that when she turned her attention to something, it mattered completely. Her father, Joseph Osei, had been a secondary school athletics coach in Accra, Ghana, before a knee injury in his mid-30s ended his own competitive running days with the particular finality of a door closing in a quiet room. He had come to the United States with Grace, and he was now a groundskeeper for the county parks system, a job he performed with the same meticulous care he had once brought to training athletes, because Joseph Osei was not a man who did anything carelessly. In the evenings, he sat in the chair by the living room window and read. He did not say very much, but when he did speak, the words arrived with the weight of something that had been considered for a long time. Their apartment was small. The kitchen ceiling had a water stain shaped roughly like the state of Florida. There was no dishwasher in one bathroom, and a living room where the couch faced a television that was two generations behind current. But the apartment was clean, and it was warm. And every morning before Amara left for school or practice, Grace Osei pressed her track uniform, the way some mothers iron a church dress, slowly, with a care that was almost ceremonial, like she was preparing something sacred for a purpose that had not yet fully revealed itself. Because to Grace Osei, that uniform was something precious. It was the uniform of a girl who was going somewhere. Grace could feel it. She had always been able to feel it. Amara had one thing she kept in the front pocket of her duffel bag behind her energy bars, and her extra pair of socks, and the small bottle of athletic balm her father had ordered online. It was a gold track pin, the kind awarded for athletic achievement at a sanctioned championship meet, about the size of a quarter, with a raised relief of a runner mid-stride on the front and engraved on the back in careful letters, E.A.O., Emmanuel Otto Osei, her grandfather, a man who had run the 100 meters at the 1984 African Athletics Championships in Cairo, who had finished 4th in his semifinal heat by 0.04 of a second, and who had pressed that pin into Amara's hand 3 weeks before he died, when she was 9 years old and sitting beside his bed in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and the particular quiet of a life drawing toward its end. He had looked at her with eyes that were tired but still very bright, and he had said, in Twi, the words that she would carry for the rest of her life. The fire does not know the size of the house it burns in. She had not fully understood it then. She was 9 years old, and grief was new and large and strange. She was beginning to understand it now. Amara ran the 100 meters in 10.9 seconds as a freshman. That is not a world record time. That is not even a remarkable time, taken in isolation, without context. But it was a time she posted in February on a cold track, in practice spikes, a full size too large because the correct pair had not yet arrived, in a secondary time trial she had not been formally invited to, but had asked to join, and that Coach Briggs had permitted with a shrug. He wrote the number down. He did not acknowledge it further. Over the next year, she dropped to 10.6. Then, quietly, at a spring invitational in March of her sophomore year, to 10.4. She finished second in her heat, behind a girl from a private school in Buckhead, who had a personal coach and a father who was, as Amara later described it, very loud about how fast his daughter was. Briggs had said, at the parents' meeting that April, that the program was deepening its roster in the sprinting positions. What he meant was that Skylar Fenwick was now on the team, and that Skylar Fenwick's father's money was now inside the program's budget, and that the architecture of the lineup was going to reflect those facts, regardless of what the stopwatch was saying when girls with less influential fathers ran past it. Amara ran harder. She stayed later on the track after the rest of the team had gone in. She began waking at 5 in the morning to run the streets around their apartment complex before school. The orange glow of the parking lot lights, following her down the sidewalk in the dark, her grandfather's pin in the chest pocket of her running jacket, a small, cold weight she had come to think of as something between a compass and a promise. Her father watched from the living room window on those mornings. He turned on the kitchen light when she went out so she would have something to run toward when she came back. He never said much about it. But once in October of her sophomore year, she came back flushed and breathing hard, and he set a cup of tea on the table in front of her and waited until she had her breath. And then he said, "Your grandfather would have liked your footfall. You're landing correctly now. You're hitting mid-foot and driving back. That's the right position." That was the highest praise Joseph Ossie had offered in 2 years of watching. But Briggs was not watching the way Joseph watched. Briggs was watching a story he had already written, and Amara was not a character in it. What Briggs watched was the clock, and the clock he watched was the one he held in his hand, which had a thumb that could reset it when the number it showed was inconvenient. He never let Amara run a full-featured heat in a showcase context, the kind where the lane was clear, and the crowd was watching, and the timing was official, and the college scouts stood at the fence with clipboards. Every time a spot opened at the top of a relay lineup, he filled it with someone else. Every time a major invitational came around, Amara was in the secondary heat, not the scout heat, not the developmental showcase. The secondary heat, where the results went into a file that nobody outside the program ever looked at. She ran them anyway. In November of her sophomore year, she posted a 10-3 in a secondary heat at a regional meet. In February, in practice, timing herself on her phone because the official timing equipment was reserved for the athletes. Briggs was developing. She ran a 10-1 on the county park path where her father worked. The number sat in her phone's notes app, unrecorded, uncelebrated, unknown to anyone except Amara and the trees along the maintenance path and the particular quality of silence that exists at 5:30 in the morning before the world starts its noise. And then came the Thursday. Late April, state qualifying season approaching. Briggs had organized what he called a depth assessment, a formal time trial to assign athletes to events for the upcoming regional invitational. These trials mattered. These were the runs that determined who was in the program's showcase spots and who was not. Amara had been in them before. She had run well before, and before it had not changed anything. She set up in the blocks the way her father had taught her, not the way Briggs had ever bothered to instruct her, and she waited for the gun. The gun fired. She ran 10-0. She knew it when she crossed the line. She felt it in the particular way the track had responded, the sensation her father had once described when he was feeling poetic as the track giving back what you gave it. The feeling of a machine engaged correctly for the first time. She slowed. She straightened. She turned and looked at Coach Briggs. He was looking at his watch, then at her. His expression did not change. He clicked the watch. He reset it. "Run it again," he said. "You broke early." She had not broken early. 3 of her teammates were close enough to see the start. They knew she had not broken early. One of them, Destiny Clark, was standing 12 feet from the blocks and had watched the whole run and had seen something she would later describe as the most beautiful sprint she had seen in 2 years on this team. Nobody said anything. She ran again. 10-1. Still the fastest time posted by any girl on the team that afternoon, by 0.4 of a second. Still a number that, had it been formally recorded and submitted, would have qualified her for the invitational showcase in 3 separate events. Briggs wrote it in his notebook. He moved on. He stopped at Skylar Fenwick and said, "Good form today, Sky. Let's look at your block exit before regionals." 2 days later, the invitational roster was posted on the gymnasium door. Amara's name was not on it. Skylar Fenwick was in lane 1. Her personal best was 10-8. Amara stood at that bulletin board for a long time. Long enough that a group of freshmen walked past, registered her stillness, and walked past again without speaking. She reached into her jacket pocket. She held the pin. She thought about her grandfather at the starting line in Cairo, about 4th place and 0.4 of a second. about what it means to come so close to something and be told by circumstance that close isn't enough. She went to find Briggs. She found him in the equipment room off the gymnasium hallway, reorganizing a shelf of relay batons and starting block bolts. She knocked. He told her to come in. She stood in the doorway and asked, in the most even voice she could produce, why she had not been selected for the invitational roster. He did not turn around. "You're too slow, Amara," he said. "You've always been too slow for this level. I need athletes who are ready to compete at this stage of the season," she said. "I ran a 10.0 on Wednesday." He turned. The look on his face was not anger, exactly. It was the look of a man who has made a decision he believes is final, and who resents the imposition of being asked to justify it. I reset that run. You broke early." "I didn't break early, coach." "Are you calling me a liar?" "No, sir. I'm asking you to look at the time." The pause that followed was not long, maybe 3 seconds. He closed his notebook, and he looked at her with an expression that communicated, with great efficiency, exactly how much weight he assigned to what she had said. "Pack your bag," he said. "You're done here. You're too slow. And frankly, you always have been. I'm releasing you from the roster. We're going in a direction this program needs, and that direction doesn't include athletes who can't compete at this level." He let that land. Then he added, with the particular magnanimity of a man who believes his own reasonableness, "If you want, I can check with Coach Peterson about the JV cross-country squad. They're always looking for bodies." Bodies. That was the word he chose. Amara Osi looked at Dale Briggs for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds that contained, somehow, more dignity than anything he had managed in 11 years of running this program. Then she said, "That won't be necessary." She turned. She walked out through the equipment room door, down the hallway, back through the gymnasium exit, and out onto the track. The afternoon practice was still running. Girls in the far lanes, a relay exchange being drilled at the exchange zone, the particular organized noise of a team at work. She walked to the bench along the fence line. She picked up her duffel bag. She swung it over her shoulder. 3 girls were watching her. Destiny Clark stood 20 feet away, close enough to read Amara's face, and what she saw there was not devastation. It was something quieter and more durable than that. It was the look of someone who has just been given the answer to a question they had been asking for a long time. Briggs had walked out of the equipment room and was standing at the edge of the track. His presence filled the space the way it always did, with the authority of someone who expects the world to organize itself around his decisions. Destiny Clark opened her mouth. She had something to say. She had the sentence formed in her mind, but she looked at Briggs, and she looked at the roster she was on, and she felt the particular weight of all the things she stood to lose, and the sentence dissolved. No one spoke. Amara walked out through the chain-link gate and did not look back. But what none of them knew, not Briggs, not the girls on the track, not the parents along the fence, was that the thing he had just dismissed was not a girl who ran 10.1 in practice. The thing he had just dismissed was a girl who ran 10.0 on a cold afternoon, without a clear lane, without proper blocks. After 18 months of running on a county park path in the dark at 5 in the morning, being coached by a man who had given up a career to raise her, and had quietly been doing the most meticulous, patient, specific training analysis anyone in this program had ever seen. Dale Briggs had no idea what he had just freed. Now go back for a moment to the pin. Because the pin is the whole story, if you know how to read it. Emmanuel Otto Osi had not always been a grandfather in a hospital room. He had been, for 35 years, one of the most respected track coaches in the Volta region of Ghana, a man who had built an athletics program in the town of Ho out of packed earth and wooden starting blocks, and an absolute, unqualified belief that the athletes who came to him were limited by nothing except time and work, and the willingness to trust what their bodies were. Already trying to tell them, he had run the 100 meters himself at 24 at the 1984 African Athletics Championships in Cairo. He had drawn lane 6. He was the 4th-ranked qualifier in a field of 8. He had run 10.1 in the morning heat. That afternoon, in the semifinal, with the full weight of the championship context, and the stadium crowd, and the presence of athletes from 12 nations arranged beside him, Emmanuel Osi had run 9.98. He had not made the final. He had missed it by 0.04 of a second, the tightest margin, the most particular kind of close, the kind that sits with a person for the rest of their life, not as bitterness but as testimony. He had been, in that moment, something he had never fully been before and would never fully be again, exactly at the edge of his own capacity. A Kenyan official named Marcus Chage had grabbed his arm after the race and said, "Where did that come from?" Emmanuel had smiled and said, "I think I've been saving it." His knee gave out the following year. The career that 998 had predicted never arrived. He became a coach instead, and he gave 30 years of himself to other people's races, and he was better at that in the end than he might have been at his own. He trained 3 athletes who went on to represent Ghana in international competition. He built a facility on a piece of ground the municipal government had written off as unusable. He did it because he believed, with the specific faith of someone who had experienced it personally, that the fire does not know the size of the house it burns in. When he died, the pin went to Grace. When Grace put it in Amara's and she said, "He told me before he went, he said, that child has it. Give her this so she knows she comes from something." Amara had asked, "Has what, exactly?" Grace had looked at her daughter for a long time. The way you look at something when you are trying to find the right words for a truth you have known for years. "The thing," Grace said, "that doesn't show up until it matters." Now, on a Thursday evening in late April, Amara sat at the kitchen table and told her mother what had happened. Grace listened without interruption, her hands around her teacup, her face still. When Amara finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, simply, "What do you want to do?" Amara looked at the pin on the table, at the initials on the back. "I want to run nationals," she said. Grace nodded, once, slowly. Joseph Osei, who had been in the chair by the window and had apparently not been reading at all, set his book down on the armrest. "Then you'll need a coach," Grace said. Joseph said yes. He looked at his daughter across the apartment. "We start Monday." He had not formally coached anyone in 19 years. What happened in the 46 days that followed was not a miracle. People want it to be a miracle. It is a better story if it is a miracle. But the truth of it is more stubborn and more magnificent than that, because the truth is that it was work. Ordinary, unwitnessed, pre-dawn, red clay Georgia work. Joseph Osei woke Amara at 4:45 every morning. They drove in the dark to the county park where he worked, where he had a maintenance key, to the Eastern Nature Preserve path, which ran a clean, flat 200 meters along the tree line. And they ran, not sprints at first. Distance. Slow, patient distance. Until Amara's breathing settled into the rhythm Joseph recognized from his own years on the track. The rhythm that means the body has stopped resisting and started cooperating. Then drills, block mechanics, the physics of a sprint start, the drive angle, the push, the patience of staying low through the acceleration phase. The 30 meters that most sprinters waste by standing up too early, trading the power they've built for the comfort of being upright. "Your grandfather stood up at 22 meters, Joseph told her, one morning in the pre-dawn cold, their breath visible in the air. It was the one flaw in his mechanics. But his back 40 was so fast it didn't matter. You are built like he was, but you have longer levers. Your stride is longer. You need to stay low until 35. Let the acceleration fully develop. Don't hurry the top speed. Trust that it's there." She didn't ask how he knew this. She had watched enough footage of Emmanuel's races, shaky video his wife had transferred from cassette tape to DVD a decade ago, which had then been converted to digital files on a laptop, to understand that Joseph had spent time with those recordings that had never been discussed. He had been studying his father-in-law's mechanics for years, quietly, on his own time, in the chair by the window, looking at something she hadn't known he was looking at. 3 times a week, they drove to an indoor facility in Atlanta, $40 a session for a day pass. Money removed from the household budget with the precision of a family that knows to the dollar what everything costs. There, a retired sprint coach named Carol Mensah, who had run for Ghana in 1992 and had known Joseph from a coaching seminar in 2003, agreed to lend her eyes and her judgment for no charge beyond the satisfaction of watching good work being done correctly. Carol Mensah watched Amara for 45 minutes on the first day, Then she turned to Joseph and said, "She's a 9-9 athlete." Joseph said, "I know." Carol said, "Who cut her from the program?" Joseph said, "A man who didn't look." Carol was quiet for a moment. "They never do," she said. She began driving down from her home in Decatur every Tuesday and Thursday. The Georgia High School Athletic Association allows an unaffiliated athlete to qualify for the state invitational through an independent qualifier pathway, a provision that exists because the XA, whatever its other failures, has always understood that talent does not exclusively emerge from within program structures. The qualifying standard for the junior women's 100 meters was 10.8 seconds, posted at any XA certified event. Amara ran 10.05 at the Athens Invitational Open on May 11th. In front of 340 spectators, 2 CUTSA certified field officials, and 1 retired sprint coach from Decatur named Carol Mensa, who watched the run from lane 1 of the adjacent section and did not say a word for almost a full minute afterward. When she did speak, she said, "The drive phase was about half a step short. We'll fix that." Amara said, "What else?" "That's all," Carol said. "That's literally all that was wrong." The qualifying time was submitted to the GASA office that afternoon. Amara Osei, junior, independent qualifier, formerly of Crestwood High School's track roster, was entered in the state invitational junior women's 100 meters. Her name appeared on the official entry list on the JASE website 4 days later. At Crestwood, nobody mentioned it. It is possible nobody looked. The program was in the middle of its own invitational season, and Coach Dale Briggs was focused on the athletes in his program, which did not include Amara Osei. The state invitational was held on a Saturday in early June at a facility in Marietta. Amara was assigned lane 4. The pre-meet rankings had her 7th in a field of 8, based on her 10.05 qualifying time, a respectable number but not a head-turning one in this company. The top seed was Imani Rhodes of Buckhead Preparatory Academy, 10.2 on the season, whose recruitment file had already been circulated at Florida, LSU, and the University of Tennessee. Joseph and Grace arrived with 2 folding chairs and a thermos of tea. They did not have a team tent. They did not have matching warm-up gear or a program banner or a coach's credential hanging around anybody's neck. They sat in the general admissions section, Section C, row 4, and Grace smoothed her jacket over her lap and looked at the track. Amara held the pin in her left hand in the call room. She held it for 30 seconds. She thought about Cairo, 1984, lane 6, 0.04 of a second. A man who had been saving something without knowing what it was for. Then she put the pin in the inside pocket of her warm-up jacket, which she would leave on the bench at the end of the track. She walked to the blocks. She looked at lane 4. She set her feet. The starter called the field, 8 girls. Lane 4, a Tuesday night kitchen table, 46 days. The gun went off. She stayed low. She trusted the acceleration. At 20 meters, she was in the middle of the pack. At 35 meters, she had not yet stood up. Carol had told her, "Don't give away the power you've built. Trust that it's there." At 50 meters, she was 4th. At 65 meters, she was 3rd, and she had still not reached top speed. At 75 meters, Carol Mensa would later say, something happened that she had seen maybe 4 times in her life, the specific physical event that separates a very fast sprinter from a historically fast one. The stride opened, not with effort, the way it looks when a runner is pushing for more speed, with the absence of resistance, like a door opening when the obstruction is removed, like something being released rather than something being forced. At 90 meters, she was first by half a stride. She crossed the line. The board took 4 seconds to post the time, 9:87. The crowd noise was not immediate. It was the noise of people who are processing what they have just seen before they have language for it, the particular sound of collective recalibration. Then it arrived, full and loud and human, 9:87 seconds, a state invitational record by 0.12 of a second, a national junior qualifying time by a margin that made the qualifying standard look like a suggestion. The 4th fastest time ever recorded by a female high school athlete in the United States. Amara stopped. She turned. She looked at the board. She looked at the number. She was breathing hard and her legs were exactly as spent as they should be, and the whole inside of her chest felt like it was made of light. She found her father's face in Section C, Row 4, and she saw that Joseph Osei, who had not cried when his knee ended his career, who had not cried at his father-in-law's funeral, who was, in the deep structure of his character, a man who regarded the public display of emotion as a kind of extravagance he had never been able to afford, was crying, not quietly, not with the dignified restraint of a man trying to hold himself together. He was crying the way a person cries when they have been holding something for 20 years, and the thing they've been holding turns out to be this. Amara walked to the fence along the track perimeter. He crossed to the railing. He put his hand through the gap in the chain link. She held it. She said, "The drive phase was right." He said, "Perfect." His voice broke on the word, perfect. But what she did not know yet, what none of them knew, sitting in Section C, Row 4, holding on through the chain link fence, was what was already happening in the world outside that stadium. Gary Ostrowski had been timing track meets for 22 years. He had timed state championship heats as regional invitationals, dual meet finals. He had never seen a 987 from a junior. He had, in fact, never seen a 987 from anyone outside of a broadcast with a slow-motion replay. He was an official, which meant he was supposed to be neutral and procedural and measured. He was also a human being who had just witnessed something, and he had a phone in his shirt pocket. He posted to his personal Twitter account 3 minutes and 40 seconds after the race ended. The post contained 3 facts: the event, the time, and Amara's school affiliation as listed on the entry form, Independent Crestwood HS, and 1 sentence of his own commentary. "Just witnessed something I'll be telling my grandkids about. Lane 4, 987. She came from nowhere." She had not come from nowhere, but the post had 4,000 retweets within 2 hours. It had been picked up by Track and Field News within 3. By Sunday morning, it ran in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's sports section. Millhaven Jr. posts, historic 987 at State Invitational. And by 10 o'clock that same Sunday morning, someone posted a thread that changed everything. Destiny Clark had spent 6 weeks carrying a weight she did not know how to set down. She had been on that track. She had been 12 feet from the starting blocks. She had seen the 10-0. She had watched Briggs reset the watch and void the time and tell Amara she had broken early when she had not broken early. She had gone home with her name on the invitational roster and a feeling in her chest that she recognized, correctly and without flinching, as shame. She had carried that shame through the invitational. She had carried it through the regional. She had carried it through 6 weeks of practice on a track whose most talented athlete was no longer on it because a man with a stopwatch had looked at her and decided she was not what the numbers said she was. At 10:04 a.m. Sunday, Destiny Clark posted a thread. It was 7 tweets. It began, "Since everyone is talking about Amara Osei, let me tell you what happened 6 weeks ago at Crestwood track practice." She described the time trial in detail. She described the 10-0. She had described the reset clock. She described Briggs's words in the equipment room, which 3 athletes had heard through the open door and had told her about in the days that followed. And she included, word for word, the phrase that had been said loud enough for a whole track to hear. "Too slow, and frankly, you always have been." By noon, too slow for who was trending in Georgia. By 2 in the afternoon, it was trending nationally. By 4 o'clock, a reporter from ESPN's digital bureau had driven from Atlanta to Millhaven and was standing in front of Crestwood High School with a camera on a tripod and a producer making phone calls. Dale Briggs was not available for comment. The Millhaven County Unified School District became available for comment with remarkable speed. By 4:30, its communications director had issued a statement. The Millhaven CUST is aware of the allegations regarding the Crestwood High School track program and has launched an immediate review of coaching decisions and athlete evaluation procedures. Dale Briggs was placed on paid administrative leave the following Monday morning before the first bell. The JUCSA opened its own inquiry the same week, specifically investigating whether the April time trial had been properly documented under program recording standards and whether a head coach had the authority under existing regulations to unilaterally void a witnessed performance time. The answer, it turned out, was no. Regulations required that any practice session time witnessed by a certified athletic staff member be formally entered in the program performance log. The 10-0 had not been entered. It had not been entered because there was no certified staff member who had countersigned the reset. The assistant coach present that afternoon had, according to his own statement, not been consulted about the decision to reset the clock and had not seen the legal basis for doing so, which meant the 10-0 was, under the rules of the governing body, the time of record, voided without authority, excluded without process, hidden from a log that was supposed to contain it. The fastest time ever recorded by a female sprinter in the history of the Crestwood program had never been written down. 3 athletes provided written statements to the district review panel. 2 of them were current invitational roster members. Both understood what their statements might cost them. Both submitted them anyway. One of them was Skylar Fenwick. It is worth taking a moment with that. Because Skylar Fenwick, the name in lane 1, the athlete whose place at the front of the lineup Amara had been displaced to accommodate, had gone home that Sunday, found her father watching a television that was showing Amara OC's 9:87 in slow motion on the sports segment, and had told him everything. She had told him about the time trial. She had told him about the reset clock. She had told him what she had heard through the equipment room door. Marcus Fenwick had listened to all of it. He had been quiet for a long time. Then he had picked up his phone and called the district superintendent directly. He had said, "I'm withdrawing my sponsorship of the booster program until this is resolved, and I'm authorizing Skylar to give a complete statement to the review panel." Some people surprise you, even people you have already decided you understand. The district review panel issued its findings in late July. The GASA inquiry concluded in August. Its 14-page report found that Coach Dale Briggs had, on at least 3 documented occasions over 2 seasons, failed to properly record the performance times of athletes of color in the program, and had on one occasion unilaterally voided a witnessed performance time inconsistent with his pre-existing evaluation of an athlete's capability. The report used the phrase demonstrable pattern of differential evaluation. It is a careful phrase. It is the phrase of an institution managing its exposure while acknowledging what it cannot deny. The families of the 3 athletes who had provided statements, and the 2 families who had filed previous complaints, and the OC family, who had waited with the particular patience of people accustomed to institutional slowness, all understood exactly what it meant. The thing it meant was, she was right and she was always right, and the record will now say so. Dale Briggs resigned before the report was released. His resignation was accepted without ceremony. The civil rights complaint filed by the OC family with the Office for Civil Rights, the federal agency that oversees Title IX and Title VI compliance in educational institutions, was settled 13 months later. The terms were not fully disclosed. What was disclosed was this: the district agreed to implement a third-party electronic performance logging system across all athletic programs. It agreed to require annual independent equity training for all coaching staff. It agreed to establish an independent athlete grievance panel with authority to review any coaching decision affecting roster placement. And it agreed to enter into its official record a formal acknowledgement that Amara OC's 10 run on the afternoon of April 23rd was a valid, witnessed, properly timed performance, that it had happened, that it was real, that she was not too slow. But Destiny Clark did not wait for any of that. She was in the infield 4 hours after the 9:87 when Amara came out of the changing area. She walked across the grass and she stood in front of her and she said, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I'm sorry it took me this long." Amara looked at her for a moment. Then she put her arms around her. "You said something," Amara told her. "You said something when it mattered most. That's enough. That's more than enough." The ESPN feature ran in late June, 7 minutes and 40 seconds. It opened on the County Park path in the early morning light. Joseph Osee walking the flat 200-meter stretch and explaining, quietly and precisely, what a proper drive phase looks like and why it matters. It showed the kitchen table. It showed Grace Osee's hands around a teacup, talking about the brown paper bag and the ironed uniform and what it means to press something carefully every morning, not because it is required, but because the act of care is itself a form of faith, and it showed the pin. The reporter held it carefully, turned it over, and the camera held on the engraving, EAO, while Amara explained who Emmanuel Ato Ose was. She explained what he had said in the hospital room. She explained what the fire does not know about the size of the house it burns in. The clip ran 14 million times in 4 days. Emmanuel Ato Ose, who had run 9:98 in Cairo in 1984 and missed the final by 0.04 of a second, became, for several weeks that summer, one of the most searched names on the internet. His granddaughter had done what he could not quite do. She had done it in Lane 4, at a facility in Marietta, Georgia, with a gold pin in the inside pocket of a jacket on a bench at the end of the track. She had done it with his words in her chest and his mechanics in her footfall and his faith, carried forward across 30 years and one hospital room and a kitchen table on a Tuesday night, still burning. The Emmanuel Ose Legacy Athletics Initiative was incorporated as a Georgia nonprofit organization 4 days after the ESPN feature. Its founding board included Carol Mensa as head of programming. Gary Ostrowski, the official who had posted the tweet, donated his next 2 months of officiating fees. Marcus Fenwick made the first major donation, quietly, without a press release. The foundation's first cohort, 12 girls ages 12 to 16, from 4 counties in the metro Atlanta area, began training in September. The program provided coaching, equipment, and facility access at no cost. It required one thing from its athletes, a written statement, submitted at the start of the season describing the moment they decided to keep running, when someone told them they should stop. The foundation's logo was designed by a graphic designer in Atlanta who donated the work. It is a small gold track pin. In October, Amara received recruiting correspondence from 14 Division I programs. She had not yet decided where she would go. She was, according to her father, not in any hurry. "The right time will come," Joseph told a reporter from the Journal-Constitution. "She knows how to wait for the moment. She's always known." He was asked whether he had known, back in April, that she had the capacity to run 9:87. He took his time with the question. "I knew she had the fire," he said. "I didn't know the number. But the number was always already there. We were just removing the obstructions." The Millhaven County Unified School District School Board voted in November to rename the track at Crestwood High School. They did not convene a committee or issue a public request for nominations. They asked Amara what she wanted it to be called. She said, without hesitating, "Emmanuel Ose Track." The sign went up on a Wednesday morning in December. It was cold. Grace Ose drove down from the distribution center on her lunch break and stood at the edge of the track in her work jacket and looked at the sign for a long time. Amara stood beside her. The pin was in Amara's hand. She had taken it out of her pocket without thinking about it. The way you reach for something that has become part of the way you move through the world. She said, "He would have liked this." Grace looked at the sign. Then she looked at her daughter. She said, "He would have liked you." There are moments in a story that need no additional language, that are exactly what they are. A mother and a daughter at the edge of a renamed track in December, holding a small gold pin, standing in the particular quality of silence that is not emptiness but arrival. The feeling of a thing that was always true, becoming visible at last. That is one of those moments. If this story moved you, if it reached the place I think it reached, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you're here for everything that comes next. I read the comments, everyone. And I want to ask you something real before you go. Has someone ever looked at you and decided, before the gun fired, before you had a chance to show them anything, that you weren't going to be enough? I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments, because I think this story is going to bring out some of the most important things people have been carrying around, and I want this space to hold them. Here's what really gets me when I sit with this. When I go back to the part of the story I can't stop thinking about, it's not the 987. As extraordinary as that number is, and it is extraordinary, it is the kind of number that rewrites what people believe is possible for a junior athlete. It is not the thing that keeps me up. What keeps me up is the Tuesday night, the kitchen table, the pin in her hand. The moment after she had been told, flat and final, by a man with 11 years of authority and a plaque on the gymnasium wall, that she was too slow and always had been, and the direction the program needed was a direction that did not include her. After all of that, she sat across from her mother and she said, "I want to run nationals, not I want to prove him wrong, not I want revenge, not I want everyone who is standing on that track to see what they missed. Just, I want to run." The fire does not need to know the size of the house it burns in. It does not need permission. It does not need to be assigned a lane or a time slot or a place on the roster. It does not need to be believed in by a man with a stopwatch whose thumb has already moved to the reset button. It burns because burning is what it does, and the only question that matters, the only question that has ever mattered, is whether you will trust it in the dark at 4:45 in the morning, on a park path in a town that doesn't know your grandfather's name. Dale Briggs looked at Amara Osei and saw a girl who would never be fast enough. What he was actually looking at was the 4th fastest junior sprint time in the history of American track and field, running on a park path in the dark, waiting for a track that was worthy of it. So here is my question, and I need you to sit with it before you scroll past. Not the surface version, the real version. What is the thing that someone told you was too slow, too small, too much, not enough? And what have you done with it since? What are you still doing with it? Because I think there are a lot of Amaras in this comment section. I think some of you are still on that Tuesday night, still at that kitchen table, still holding the pin, still trying to figure out whether the fire you feel is real, or whether the man with the stopwatch was right. He wasn't right. He was never right. What happens when you decide to run anyway?